your instinct might be, well, let's just use logic. And I think with some people, you can have logical conversations, but that is very rare. Don't spend too much time trying to persuade. So much of our deepest miseries, memories, and worst experiences in life come as a result of us just going up against the current of people's natural human nature and character. This is especially true in business when we talk about markets. I'm reminded of this quote, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in the shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat. We must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures." So this is from Shakespeare. Julius Caesar is the play. And in context here, Brutus is trying to persuade for an attack to actually happen in the context of the play. But he's also just, I think, saying, and it applies directly to what we're talking about in this video, that there's a tide in the nature of people in terms of what we want, in terms of our mood, in terms of our preferences, in terms of just character, things that we are biologically and or neurologically wired to want. There's a tide in terms of changes in our lives and seasons of our lives. There's a tide in the marketplace especially too, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune, meaning if we get out our surfboard and we ride the wave, it leads on to fortune, meaning that our lives will be better, our relationships will be better, and our businesses will be bigger and more profitable if we just accept this fact. Because so often we are mired in the, quote, bound in the shallows and in miseries. Our voyage is bound in the shallows and in miseries because we don't accept this, because we forget it, we don't keep it in mind. I have a friend who this week is opening an art gallery, and she is a bit more introverted, not the biggest people person, at least at this time in her life, that's just honest, but she's considering different ways to bring in revenue for the art gallery other than just selling art. And one of the ways she was considering was to actually give painting lessons. And we went for a walk, the other day. She was out walking her dog. And she was telling me that this was, one of the ideas. And I had my hands in my pockets, and I just casually told her, as a friend, being honest, hey, I don't think that's a great idea. I think that you would be much better served, and I think, knowing you, that you would find it much more enjoyable to just have the gallery open, have these events there. But, working one-on-one, you kind of want to do your own thing, and that's fine. So there's a tide in ourselves too, is what this situation helped to remind me of, and where we sort of have to look at our own nature in terms of how we work. Because I said, otherwise, we'll call her Jane. Otherwise, Jane, I think you're going to be unhappy. Yeah, you could probably bring in some money that way, but do you want to be doing work that you hate versus just focusing on other areas where I can tell you're more enthusiastic about it, because she had some other ideas that I thought were better and more aligned with the tide within her. There's also a tide in ourselves, and part of the title of this video is about you can't sweep the tide. What I want you to picture when I say that is like a giant broom. Even if you had a massive broom or a rake of some kind and you tried to sweep the tide, it's water. It's all water, baby. It's going to flow right through. And even if you manage to brush it back for a little while, the tide is still coming in at some point, or it's just going to flow right through your big old broom. So you literally cannot sweep the tide, but you cannot sweep the tide in terms of the affairs of men, to use this phrase from the quote from Shakespeare either. Another example is in relationships and dating. And something to realize there, if you are in this situation, we're all in relationships, right? But something worth keeping in mind is that most people change, but they change very slowly and often very little, if at all. It's actually more likely than for any of us to change. We are more likely to learn to hide the bad or the negative and instead trumpet the good parts of ourselves. And in a way, this is changing ourselves. But if you're in a close relationship with someone who is hiding perhaps what we might call the negative parts or just certain other parts of themselves, it's going to come out in different ways or directly at some point. So that's not really a true fundamental change. To use a couple of simple examples, a man who is single and chases women instead of doing more productive things with his time and prioritizing that instead, this is part of the current of his character up to this moment in his life. And a girl who might want a relationship with him can try to change him, can try to persuade or manipulate or whatever to get him to want her, to be in a relationship, but it's going to be much easier for that girl to just find someone where that type of interest is mutual. It's going to be much more difficult otherwise. To just simply, ride the current of someone else who is perhaps just more aligned with ultimately what she is looking for in the dating marketplace. Second would be a girl whom a guy takes on a nice date but doesn't say thank you, versus the expectation of the guy is, and I've heard this from other guy friends and I've experienced it myself too, where I took someone on a very nice date and spent a decent chunk of money and I did not get a thank you. And I expected it, right? And the phrase happiness is reality minus expectations aside, this is just part of who this person is or was up to that point in her life. And I can get annoyed that in the fact that there's even a tide in the affairs of men. Just that there's just a certain way that people are. But accepting that is actually an opportunity. It actually opens more doors, even though it may seem to close some in the short term. In business partnerships, same thing. People change, but once again, very slowly, if at all. A business partner who is lazy or contributes little value or who has a afflictive personality or just a strong difference of vision, even if it's just coming out in subtle ways, don't expect him to change because that way can lead to ruin. I find that a lot of disagreements or arguments are usually just a waste of time, especially when you keep this wisdom and this insight, which, again, just keeping this fact of human nature in mind, it's going to save you a lot of time. If you're in an argument or disagreement, if you're like me, your instinct might be, well, let's just use logic. And I think with some people, you can have logical conversations in certain specific contexts, but it really requires all participants and you to also know, if you are one of those participants, you need to let go of ego, let go of pride, and just be able to look at evidence and use logic, if then this. But that is very rare. More likely than not, there's going to be other things under the surface that will actually be more likely to influence opinions and points of view. So it's better to just sort of almost like survey. Don't spend too much time trying to persuade. You can only really persuade people who are open to it or who want to be persuaded. This is what I would say. You can relate it, I think, in perhaps one of the most important ways to markets. In business, broadly speaking, when we're dealing with markets, we're dealing with the currents of human character and preferences averaged across hundreds, thousands, depending on what business you're in and what market you're in, potentially millions and billions of potential customers. And this brings me back to cite another source for what I'm saying here, who is Mark Andreessen. Mark Andreessen is a venture capitalist, also a former entrepreneur. He created Netscape at the sort of dawn, if you will, of the internet. And he wrote a famous blog post where he talked about his investing philosophy. And he kind of walked through the different aspects in terms of like what were his priorities and what were the key persuasion points that he looks to be persuaded on as a potential investor in different ventures. And he explained that he believes it's best to invest in the market first, before people, before idea. Quote, "The market always wins." And it's true. It's true. There are so many examples. There's a graveyard of startups out there where the bodies that are buried in this graveyard, it's just littered with examples of businesses and people who were stubborn and who wanted to sweep the tide rather than get out a surfboard, surf the current, and monetize riding the wave instead. So I agree with Marc Andreessen, the market always wins, in part because there's a tide in the affairs of men. If you want more examples of this, like just go and watch Shark Tank and pay attention to what companies report making little money because they get on there, Shark Tank, if you've ever seen an episode, people get up, they make their pitch, and you'll get a glimpse of the story of their lives, the people who are running these businesses. And in a number of key cases, you feel a little bad because as an outsider, it's always easiest, right, for us to spot the flaws in thinking or the flaws in decision making in the lives of others because we're watching through a third-party lens. And so if you watch some of these past episodes, you'll see people who spend years of their life pitching and selling a product that at best is maybe just nice to have, but the market just doesn't want it. There just isn't a fundamental need for it. And so these individuals, sadly, and the sharks, which I think is they're doing a service, even if sometimes they're kind of being jerks about it. They're doing it partially for entertainment purposes too, and to build their brand and blah, blah, blah. But they're also on some level, I think, just being honest, even if it doesn't sound nice sometimes. They're telling these entrepreneurs in many cases where it's true, look, you got to take this dog out behind the shed, meaning their product or their service, and you got to shoot it, because it's not working out. You got to shoot your dogs early, I think, to paraphrase something that Barbara Corcoran said in the past. If the market really wants it, if they have a need for it, you're going to be able to feel, in the best case scenario, you're going to be able to feel the market like really just pulling the product out of you. There's so much demand. There's so much interest and there's so much demand and there's so much feedback coming in. I've been lucky enough to experience this once, and I think we're about to experience it again on a much bigger scale with the launch of Grobo.com, our AI business growth automation platform. We're doing something with AI that I believe fundamentally is unique in the way that we're delivering it for the benefit of businesses and entrepreneurs. If you're interested, go check us out at Grobo.com to learn more. The first time that I experienced this sort of pull from the market was when we launched our productized service starting in 2019 into 2020, refined the pitch and the value proposition. Within the span of 4 months, we tripled. And then from end of 2020 to 21, we quadrupled again in the span of 4 months. And it was, talk about a ride. It was hectic. It was stressful. But at the same time, it felt awesome. The market was literally pulling the productized service out of us, and they wanted it. The dogs like the dog food. That's an expression in startups if you're not familiar. Like, do the dogs like the dog food? They talk about dog fooding your own product, meaning you basically become a user or a customer of your own product or service. That's the ideal situation that you want to be in. If you're not in it, it's okay. You might still have a great product or service. You might just be in a competitive market. Or maybe you want to consider refining. Like, how can you be more unique? How can you maybe, I'm not telling you to go have shiny object syndrome. Be very careful with that as an entrepreneur, but maybe you want to consider, well, what new products or services can I create that maybe there's more of that demand for? Because if you can ride a wave of market demand, you're going to be in great shape. Don't expect to be able to flip a market because there's a tide in the affairs of men. Ride the tide. Persuasion and marketing, think of it as only as serving as a guide to influence markets. Okay, you can channel the market's momentum and energy with the offers and how you position your offers to the market or segments of the market. Okay, the best politicians and marketers in history, they know this. Okay, they know this. So when you see someone getting up there and expressing a point of view and blah, 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 and wow, they sound so elegant and smart, or you see, past interviews where like, oh man, this entrepreneur was a genius. Maybe he or she was, but on the flip side, or not to take any credit away from them, because that person undoubtedly, in the cases I'm thinking about, like in the case of Steve Jobs, had to be incredibly smart and work incredibly hard and to make the right decisions at the right time. But part of those right time decisions were surfing the tide, the latent demand that was out there, the current of character in people, in terms of preferences, in terms of what the market wanted. Don't expect that you can flip a market. It rarely, if ever happens, think of it more like a fluke. A politician is more likely to be able to flip a market of potential voters in terms of political opinions, because those are more fickle than when money is involved. When money is involved, people are going to be more pragmatic, more invested. Psychologically speaking, they're going to make different kind of decisions. So you'll probably never flip the market. You can just sort of like guide the momentum where you want to go and try to capture it and monetize it. Okay. So in conclusion, you can't sweep the tide. Instead, surf the current and learn to monetize the ride. Enjoy monetizing the ride. If you enjoyed this video and you found it valuable and insightful for you, please consider liking and leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, ideas for future videos, I'd love to hear that as well. If you'd like to learn more about what I and my team have been diligently working on and what we are launching right now, check us out at grobo.com. Grobo is an AI business growth automation platform. In other words, we are helping businesses to automate their growth through the application of AI agents and agentic workflows. So it's very cool. I think it's going to be the best product that I've ever had the privilege to work on, and I'm so excited to bring it to you and to others. So check us out at grobo.com. We're launching it right now. As of this moment, you can get early access for $1. So please like and subscribe, and consider sharing this with others if you think they'll also find it valuable. It's word of mouth referrals from individuals like you who help to grow this channel. Thank you so much.